Hi, you're watching the M2M Project, and I'm your host, Sebastian MacLean. Today, we'll be talking to film producer Suzanne Lyons out of LA and a good friend of mine. Suzanne, welcome to the M2M Project. Thanks so much for meeting me here today.
It's fun. I haven't seen you in ages, and it's so fun to be on Zoom. Oh
I
my
know.
gosh. Because then years ago it was just phone calls, right? And now it's like you can see people. It's so cool, like being in
That's
a
right.
meeting.
Yeah,
I
you were
love it.
lucky if you could record those and getting them for people to see
Oh
was
God, yeah.
a challenge. So now we've got all this. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Well, the first question I kind of had to kind of throw out there was just how you got involved in producing, and I guess the other part of that question that I had kind of pegged down was how you kind of navigated the complexities of the role of producer as well, because making the decision is one thing, but knowing what you're doing in this business, as
Yeah.
a lot of people know, is another thing.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's funny. I think it's something I've wanted to do since the time I was a child. As I used to watch movies. And it was funny when we were kids, when we'd watch movies, we would always look to see if there was a name, like if there was a name Sue or Suzanne or a Lyons, like, anything. And, my cousins and I would be sitting there watching, or my sisters at the theater. We had like one little theater. It was 20 cents back then to go to a movie when you were a kid.
Wow.
And it was like, oh my God, there's my name up there, Suzanne, or there's the name Lyons, or the name Sue, or anything that was even close to my name. So I think I've always wanted to be kind of involved in some way. And I'm a very visual person. So I mean, I've always kind of, I kind of dreamed of this. And then I still went to university, and did what everybody else did back then and got a degree. But I kept knowing that there was something else. So in my kind of final year of university, I applied for film and television school, and then went to Ontario, because I'm from New Brunswick, Canada. Went up to Ontario and studied film and broadcasting in London, Ontario, and started working in television first and broadcast. And then eventually we moved down to Philadelphia, worked in television there as well, but more in sales. I was at a sales agency, actually, selling television and film. And then eventually we said, let's come out to LA, because my husband's a showrunner. He does television, and I wanted to more expand into film producing, and teamed up with Kate Robbins at the time for a number of years. I think we were partners for about 10 or 11 years. And to answer the second part of your question, I think it's because nobody told me that it might be hard, Sebastian. It's like, I didn't know. That's the one thing about being innocent in that sense, and not knowing, even though I had joined IFP West, or whatever it was called, like our independent film group here, and I joined Women in Film, and I was always going to these events, but nobody ever talked about that it might be difficult. So I didn't know it was difficult. So I would just be making calls, and Kate and I, we developed about 16 projects, and then our coach said, and make sure you pick one, and just focus on one. That was the big, that was a big learning lesson in I think it was 99. Yeah, I was doing a class, and our coach, Kate and I's coach, said, Heidi Wall was her name. She said, just pick one, just pick one of the 16 that you've developed, and go for it. So we picked one, which was a romantic comedy, and we just started making phone calls. And I tried to call. I was trying to get Joe Pesci at the time. It ended up being Chris Walken, but our first kind of person we looked at was Joe, and his attorney, because at that point he had an attorney in New York, and he hung up on me for at least a year, literally a year.
Yeah.
Every time I'm Suzanne Lyons, I don't have any money, but I have a really good script. Slam the phone down. But so I just called back a week later, and they slammed the phone down. And then so Kate and I just kept making these calls, and to ICM and CAA, and sometimes people would take the call and sometimes they wouldn't. And then eventually we put our first actor on board, and then and then moved on to the next actor and the next actor, and then Naomi Watts and Chris Walken, and we just thought, okay, well, that's what you do. Just pick up the phone and make these cold calls and call the agents. And it was a good script. That's what we knew. We did have that going for us. So it was a fantastic script and fun. And then I had to call Miramax, because the investors that we ended up putting on board wanted to know that they had a big distributor, because it was a fairly good sized budget. It wasn't like back then it was film, it wasn't digital, right? So our budgets were in the millions back then.
Yeah.
And that was in the year. So, so from a year of making making the decision of choosing that particular one, a year later, we were on set in just outside Cardiff in Wales, shooting our first movie, Undertaking Betty.
Right.
So it was after that that we realized it was hard. I mean, kind of, after we did we did 2 or 3 of those actually, but then we started to hear people saying, "Oh my God, how hard it was!" And we're going, "What do you mean it was hard? Just pick up the phone and talk to investors, or pick up the phone and talk to people who might know investors. Pick up the phone, talk to agents, and that sort of thing." Nowadays, it is a little more difficult because there's so many more movies being made with digital, and you're competing with a lot more people these days, and the agents are more protective. See, back then it was you needed the actors to do a number of pre-sales. And now with pre-sales have fallen so much since 2008, 9, and 10, that now they're wanting, escrow, deals up front, pay or play deals up front, which indie producers obviously can't do. And so it's kind of a bit of a different world, but I still don't have the conversation going on that it's hard, because, you take actions in life correlated to the way the world occurs for you. So if it's going to be occurring as difficult, you're not going to take the actions needed to really make something happen, right? So I've never kind of bought into that story. So I'm on my 14th film right now, all feature films. Yeah.
Would you say that, I guess, just if I'm kind of reading maybe a little bit between the lines on that story and how things developed for you, was it maybe because you started in London, as you were mentioning, and you're kind of developing relationships and contacts, and the ease or lack thereof, it seems to me, of getting something assembled is just being able to have the right connections. And if there are people who are competent or have the resources, whatever side of that coin they lean toward, it helps a lot when you start to pick up the telephone, that at least you have some people around you that, or would you say it was just more heavy naivety and kind of just moving forward?
Yeah, we didn't have any connections. I mean, we're based here. Kate was based in Delaware, and I was here in Burbank.
Yeah.
And we called pretty much every sales agent, because back then, because there were pre-sales, you had your sales agent on board before you made your movie. Right. Because you needed them to do the pre-sales when you got a couple of names, and then you would put on preferably about half the budget, in this case 1.8 million, then your investor would match the 1.8 million in our case. So you really needed that sales agent to do those kinds of things, and we provided that first or second name, that name, like the Christopher Walken name, for example. And so I called them all, and they all said no. And we called all the studios, because we thought, first of all, it read like a studio movie, because it was American. It was basically to take place in Milwaukee, was where the screenplay was set. And every time I call, I would pitch it, and people would laugh and go, "My God, Suzanne, this sounds amazing. It sounds so unique and different and funny and interesting. Please send it over." And then, of course, it takes about 3 or 4 months to hear back from everybody. And everybody would call and they say, "Oh my God, the best script we've ever read." And I said, "Oh my God, so you like it? Is this a green light?" "No, we're passing." "You're passing, but you just said it was a bit." "Yeah, but for a studio like us, it's too unique and funny and different and interesting." So the very words they said that they loved were the very things that had them pass. "But if you have something like a remake of Beverly Hillbillies, we'd like to hear it." You know what I mean? Because they were so scared to take a chance. And it was we did that for that first number of months, and it was only after that we realized this is not I'm not going that route. I am not going the studio route. This has now become an indie movie. If nobody gets it to that degree where they're also nervous to try something different and funny and romantic, then maybe we should look at going independent with this. And we were watching the Academy Awards, the second Academy Award that Brenda Blethyn had been nominated for. And the day after that Academy Award, Kate called me from Delaware, and she said, "You know what? I don't think it's America either." And because it was so quirky, and it really does read like one of those wonderful British, quirky comedies. And that's when the minute she said, "I think it's Brenda Blethyn, and I think it's British." It was brilliant. It was her idea. And I said, "Kate, I can't even see it as Milwaukee anymore. It's definitely British. There's no question." Right. And that's when we called a bunch of sales agents in the UK, and they all said no, except the final one we called said, "Oh my God, I love this. I just love it. It's the best script." Oh my, and she loved it. And then we started calling producers in England, because we needed partners to help us with the funding, the UK part of the funding, right? And people were like, some people weren't taking our calls. And finally we called these guys who were fairly new like us. And they said, oh my God, we love it. It sounds so funny. And we love Brenda Blethyn over here and all that. And that's when we teamed up with these guys. They were almost as green as we were. They had just made their first little movie.
Mhm.
And that's when we started to kind of move forward on the whole thing. And then Kate and I did the casting from this end because we couldn't afford a casting director. So we did it ourselves.
Right.
And the rest of it is history.